There is a 40-second sequence at the end of the 25th episode of the fourth season of Adventure Time, first aired on Cartoon Network on October 15th, 2012, in which a 1,000-year-old vampire sits beside a man who used to take care of her, reads aloud a note he wrote her before he forgot her name, and slowly turns the note into a song he plays drums to without recognizing the words. He wrote the note about 1,000 years before that moment. He wrote it because he was already losing himself, and he knew it, and he wanted to apologize to her in advance for whatever the magic crown was about to make him become. He thinks now that they are writing the song together. She knows he wrote it alone a long time ago, while his mind was disappearing under a hat. That episode is called I Remember You. The girl singing the song is Marceline. She is the closest thing this strange children's cartoon ever produced to a fully developed philosophy of how a person survives outliving everyone they ever loved. The show mostly lets you forget that. For the next 2 hours, we are going to slow down into the fact of her. Adventure Time gave Marceline more screen time, more flashbacks, and more dedicated specials than almost any other character outside of Finn and Jake. And underneath every one of those flashbacks is a question philosophers have been arguing about for 2,500 years. What is a person across time? What is a self when memory leaves? What does it mean to love when you have forever and the people you love do not? What does evil inherit and what does evil teach? What does anyone owe a parent who chose to keep a thing that hurts? Why does a person keep singing in a ruined city? We are going to go through it slowly in 7 parts with no rush and no need to take anything in tonight that does not want to be taken in. If at any point during these next 2 hours you fall asleep, that is the goal. The voice is here, the story is here, it will keep going whether or not you stay awake for it. Before we go further, a quick note. If you find that long-form sleep essays like this help you wind down, hitting subscribe is the cheapest possible way to make sure more of them keep coming. It costs nothing and takes about 3 seconds. Now, back to her. To understand Why I Remember You is the heaviest 11 minutes of television Adventure Time ever produced, you have to understand what is technically happening on screen, because the show, in classic Adventure Time fashion, mostly hides it under jokes about a penguin named Gunter and a wig made out of dyed black hair. The plot is not really the point of the episode. The plot is just the surface that lets the camera linger long enough on the real subject. The real subject is a problem in the philosophy of personal identity that has been sitting on the desks of metaphysicians since John Locke wrote about a prince and a cobbler in 1690. Locke's question, simplified all the way down, is this: if a person's memories are gone, are they still that person? He gave the case of a prince whose memories somehow get transferred into the body of a cobbler. The body is the cobbler's body, but the soul, in Locke's view, is wherever the continuous chain of memory lives. He concluded that the prince is the prince, even in the cobbler's body, because the memories carry the person across. Now run that question backward, and you get the situation Marceline is in. The body is still the body. It is the same Simon Petrikov she remembers. He is older, his beard is longer, his nose is, by the show's design choices, a little more comedically large than it was, but he is the same human animal who, 1,000 years ago, found her crying alone in a ruined city and gave her a teddy bear. The body is continuous. The chain of memory, however, has been broken in one direction only. She remembers him, he does not remember her. There is no one else alive who remembers what he was. Locke's prince and cobbler problem becomes, in I Remember You, a question that the show actually shoves up against your face for 40 seconds. At the end, if memory is what makes someone a person, and only one of these two people can carry the memory, what exactly is the relationship between them? The answer, the episode quietly suggests, is that Marceline is, alone, the entire reason Simon Petrikov still exists at all. She is his memory now. Without her, he's just a strange, angry old man in an icy keep with a flock of penguins. With her, he is a person who once existed, who once gave a child a teddy bear, who once wrote a note saying he was sorry. That is what philosophers like Derek Parfit, who spent decades on these questions in the late 20th century, kept circling around. Parfit eventually argued that personal identity is not really the bedrock thing we think it is. What matters across time is psychological continuity, the chain of memory and intention and habit that links one moment of a self to the next. When that chain breaks, identity in the strict sense breaks. What remains is a different person who happens to share a body with the one who came before. But Parfit also insisted, gently, that this is not as bad as it sounds. We do not need a hard self threading through every minute of our lives in order for our lives to mean something. What we need is connection. We need someone, somewhere, holding the chain. In I Remember You, Marceline is holding the chain. The song is the moment where she is so overwhelmed by what is happening that she starts singing the note out loud, just so the words exist in the air. She is using her voice to keep him alive in a way his own mind no longer can. He sits there next to her playing drums, oblivious, in a state of cheerful non-existence. He thinks they are jamming. They are not jamming. She is performing a one-sided memorial service for someone who is sitting right beside her. Notice what the show does not do. It does not have her cure him. It does not have a magical reveal where the crown falls off and Simon comes back. The episode ends with him still gone. The flashback at the end is the show's way of saying, here is what you are watching her sing about. Here is the thing she is alone with. The very last image is a young Marceline sitting in the rubble of a destroyed civilization, looking up to find a man with kind eyes and a stuffed animal in his hands. And the man wipes her tears. And that man no longer exists. The episode aired on October 15th, 2012. 2.5 million people watched it the night it premiered. Many of them were children. The episode was rated TV PG. It is, on the surface, an episode about an annoying old man in an ice castle wanting to write a song. Underneath, it is one of the most concentrated meditations on memory and personhood ever put inside a kid's cartoon. If you grew up watching Adventure Time, this is probably the episode that, the first time you watched it, did something to you that you could not exactly name. That feeling has a name. It is the feeling of running into the question of whether the people you love are the same people they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, before this disease, before this loss, before the slow change. It is the question of what you owe to a person who is no longer the person you owed something to. The episode does not give you an answer. It just gives you Marceline sitting on a couch, singing. This is not the only time the show will pull this move. It is the first time it pulls it cleanly, and it is the move that defines the rest of her arc. Once you have seen Marceline holding the chain in I Remember You, every later episode that touches her past becomes a footnote on this. Stakes is a footnote on this. Simon and Marcy is a footnote. Even the kiss in the series finale is, in some real sense, a footnote on this. Because what Adventure Time is quietly building over its entire run is a single thesis about Marceline. She is the show's archive. She is the only character who remembers everything. She is the only one who has lived long enough to lose enough. To live a normal human life is to forget most of what happens to you. Memory is sieve-like in any normal person. You retain 1/100% of the actual minutes that have passed through you. By the time a human turns 90, the vast majority of what they once knew is gone. Memory loss is not a feature of dementia alone. It is the basic shape of being a person across decades. But Marceline does not forget at the rate humans forget. The show is consistent about this. She remembers her mother. She remembers what fries used to taste like before the war. She remembers Simon when he was Simon. She remembers, at 1,000 years old, the little details of a world that has not existed for 10 centuries. The show does not present this as a magical power. It presents it as a slow tax. Every memory she keeps is a memory of something that no longer exists. To remember everything is, in her case, to be the only living wall a vanished civilization is leaning against. There is a school of thought, going back at least to the Stoics, and reaching forward to thinkers like the late 20th century philosopher Bernard Williams, that mortality is not a curse, but a structural condition for caring about anything. Williams wrote a famous essay in the 1970s called The Macropoulos Case, named after a play and an opera about a woman who lived several centuries by drinking an elixir. Williams's argument was that immortality, sustained long enough, would empty out everything that made a life worth living. The categorical desires that motivate a human life, he argued, are tied to having a finite arc. Strip the arc out, leave only the desires, and eventually the desires themselves become hollow. The Macropoulos woman in his reading ends up bored, alienated, and quietly desperate. She has lived too long for any new experience to matter, and too long for any old experience to be retrievable in the way it once was. Marceline is a partial test of Williams's argument. She is not bored, not exactly, but she is haunted in a way that mortal characters are not. The show again and again gives her scenes where she is alone in her house at night, playing bass quietly, watching the light change. The frame around her is full of objects from previous centuries that no one else recognizes. There is a softness to her that the other characters interpret as cool, or detached, or moody. It is none of those things. It is the softness of a person who has had to learn to make peace with the fact that the things she loves are mostly things that no longer exist. When you are watching the episode I Remember You, this is what you are seeing. Not a vampire trying to write a song with an annoying old man, not even a tragic relationship between two characters. You are seeing what Williams worried about, displaced into the body of a teenage-coded 1,000-year-old sitting next to her own past in human form, unable to reach him, refusing to leave him alone. You are seeing the difference between memory as a tool and memory as a vocation. For Marceline, memory is a vocation. She has decided to be the one who carries it. She does not have to. The show is clear about this. She could simply not visit Simon. She could simply not write the songs. She could let the past go the way humans let the past go because they cannot help it. She does not. The note Simon wrote her, the one that becomes the song, is not a note she found that day in his castle. She has had it. She has been keeping it. The show shows, almost throwaway, that she has had this note for the entire span of his transformation. She has been waiting for him to be calm enough that she could read it to him, even knowing he would not understand. That is what the visit is. That is what every visit is. She is the keeper of the chain. There is a phrase used in the contemporary philosophy of grief, mostly by writers working in the wake of thinkers like Maurice Blanchot and the late Jacques Derrida, that gets at this. They talk about how mourning is not the work of getting over someone, it is the work of carrying them. To mourn is to take up the position of being the one who remembers, and to keep that position even when no one else around you understands why. Derrida, who lost many of his closest friends late in his life, kept giving funeral speeches in which he refused to say goodbye to the dead. He insisted that goodbye was not what was being asked of him. What was being asked of him was simply witness. That is what Marceline does for Simon Petrikov in I Remember You. She does not say goodbye. She refuses, episode after episode, to say goodbye. She bears witness. The song is a witness's song. The fact that he plays drums beside her without understanding that he is the subject of the song does not weaken the witness. It just clarifies that witness is something you do alone, even when there is someone with you. It is also worth lingering on a small detail that the episode makes you forget about almost immediately. The note Marceline reads is at the level of physical evidence the only surviving piece of Simon Petrikov's old handwriting. There is no other Simon out there. There are no friends of his who knew him before. There are no surviving family members. The civilization that produced him, with its newspapers and its institutions and its ordinary records, has been gone for 1,000 years. The handwriting on the note is, in a literal sense, the last trace of the man as a man. When he loses the ability to read it, that trace becomes private. Only Marceline can recognize it. Only Marceline can decode it. The note becomes, in the technical historian sense, a manuscript without a public. Adventure Time has been doing this for a long time before this episode. There is an earlier 2-part special called Holly Jolly Secrets, which originally aired across 2 days in late 2011, in which Finn and Jake stumble across a series of video diaries that Simon Petrikov, the human, had recorded for himself in his own home, before the crown took him. The diaries show Simon talking to a video camera, increasingly frightened, increasingly aware that he is losing himself. He addresses the diaries to no one in particular. He is not sure whether he will ever get to play them back as the same person who recorded them. The diaries are, in the philosophical sense, a kind of attempted self-archive. Simon, in his last lucid period, was trying to leave a chain of evidence behind him. He was hoping that the chain might survive even if he did not. There is something almost desperate about the project. He filmed himself singing songs, talking to nothing, reciting facts about his life, naming his fiancée Betty, who at that point had already disappeared into a temporal accident the show eventually clarifies in much later episodes. He was, in effect, throwing his memories outside his own body in the hope that something on the outside would still be there for him to come back to. The plan does not work for him. By the time Finn and Jake find the diaries, Simon as Simon is already gone. The diaries are just curiosities to them. They watch some of the videos, get embarrassed by the intensity of his loneliness, and turn them off. The diaries are functionally lost. Simon, the human, attempted a self-archive that only an external mind could complete. The external mind required for that completion is Marceline. She is the only one who can actually open the diaries and recognize them as what they are. She is the only one for whom the self-archive functions as a self-archive. For everyone else, the diaries are noise. This is the structural condition of memory across long time. Memory is not stored just inside individual heads. It is stored in the relationships between heads. A photograph means nothing without someone who can recognize the person in it. A note means nothing without someone who can read the handwriting. A song means nothing without someone who knows what it once meant. The objects of personal memory are inert without other minds keeping them lit. This is, by the way, a position that the contemporary cognitive scientist Edwin Hutchins has made famous under the name distributed cognition. Hutchins argued in a series of careful studies through the 1990s that human cognition is not really inside the skull. It is distributed across the skull and the environment in other people. A pilot navigating a plane is not, strictly speaking, navigating with their brain alone. They are navigating with their brain, plus the instruments in front of them, plus the co-pilot, plus the radio. The cognition is the whole system, not just the head. Personal memory works similarly. The you of 20 years ago is not stored just in your present brain. The you of 20 years ago is stored in your brain, plus the photographs your parents kept, plus the friends who remember you from school, plus the diary you wrote, plus the artifacts you have not thrown away. When the friends die, when the photographs are lost, when the diary is forgotten, the you of 20 years ago becomes harder to retrieve. The you is, in a real sense, dispersed. Marceline in I Remember You is the entire dispersed network for Simon. She is, alone, the friends, and the photographs, and the diary. She is the whole external system that lets the man on her couch be more than just a confused old man in a strange hat. Without her, he would simply be the Ice King forever. With her, he is also somewhere underneath, still Simon. The difference is invisible from the outside. He looks the same either way. The difference is real though, the way most differences in the philosophy of mind are real, even when they are invisible. This is the work that takes 1,000 years. He is in the bones of every other section of this video, because she is in the bones of every other section, and he is the first axis of her self-understanding. But before we move on, hold this scene in your mind. A girl who is not exactly a girl, sitting on a couch in the late afternoon light of a post-apocalyptic world, reading a 1,000-year-old apology note to its writer, while he laughs and plays drums and offers to add a guitar solo. That image is the entire show, compressed. Section 2. The Mushroom and the Daughter. The Mushroom War is one of the most quietly daring world-building decisions in modern animation. It is not a war we ever see clearly. It is named, half-jokingly, after a giant mushroom cloud-shaped destruction. It is implied across hundreds of episodes that humanity nearly wiped itself out somewhere around our own present, and that the magical land of Oo is what grew out of the ruins of our civilization centuries later. Finn, the human boy at the center of the show, is one of the last living humans because almost everything the show takes for granted, the candy people, the elementals, the kingdoms, the magic, is what filled the void after the human story stopped. Marceline is the only major character in Adventure Time who was alive for the war. She was, by the show's chronology, a small child when civilization ended. The episode Simon and Marcy, which aired on Cartoon Network on March 25, 2013, gives the most detailed picture we get of what the early years of post-war O looked like. The episode is set by Marceline's own framing of the story, 996 years before the present-day events of Adventure Time. The number is not a guess. The episode names it directly. She tells Finn and Jake the story while they sit at her house, unable as usual to fully grasp what they are being told. The episode is one of the few where Adventure Time fully drops the fantasy aesthetic and lets you see the world as it actually was just after the bombs fell. Roads broken, cars rusted. A city skyline still recognizable as 21st century Earth. Mutated people wandering between the buildings, half feral, half catatonic. Marcy is small, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She has a fever, she has a stuffed animal, the same one Simon will give her in the final flashback of I Remember You. Simon at this point is somewhere in the middle of his transformation. He still has long stretches of lucidity. He can still remember his own name. He can still remember songs. The most famous moment of the episode is a quiet one. Simon, trying to distract Marcy from her fever, sings the theme song to the 1980s American sitcom Cheers. The use of that song was famously a placeholder during storyboarding that the writers fell in love with so much that they paid for the rights to keep it in. It is a song about a place where everybody knows your name. He is singing it in a ruined world to a child who will outlive every other person who has ever known her name. When you sit with that scene, what you have is Camus. Albert Camus, the French-Algerian writer who died young in a car accident in 1960, spent his short life writing about a question that he called the only really serious philosophical question. His name for it was the absurd. The absurd, in Camus' language, is what happens when a human being who needs the world to make sense runs into a world that does not make sense. When a person who is finite, who is going to die, who is asking why, runs into a universe that gives back no clear answer. The absurd is the gap. It is the silence on the other side of your demand for meaning. Camus thought there were 3 responses to the absurd. The first was suicide, which he rejected. The second was a leap of faith into something transcendent, like religion, which he admired but did not think was honest. The third, the one he advocated, he described in his book, The Myth of Sisyphus. You probably know the myth. The gods in the Greek story condemn Sisyphus to roll a boulder up a hill. Every time he gets it to the top, the boulder rolls back down, and he has to start again. There is no end. There is no escape. There is no audience. The gods picked this punishment because they thought it was the cruelest possible thing. Endless, useless labor. Camus' move was to ask, what if Sisyphus is happy? What if Sisyphus, knowing his task is meaningless, decides anyway that he will roll the boulder, that he will pay attention to the texture of the stone, that he will love the brief view from the top, that he will not give the gods the satisfaction of breaking him? The famous last line of the essay is that one must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because Sisyphus' situation is good, because choosing to keep moving is the only honest answer to absurdity that does not lie. Simon and Marcy, the post-war child and the disintegrating man, are absurdism set to a sitcom theme. They are wandering through a destroyed world, a world where the project of human civilization has just collapsed. There is no logical reason to keep going. There is no clear future. There is no help arriving. Every adult around them is half mutated or already dead. Their food is whatever cans they can find. The episode opens with Simon getting a can of soup from a half-functional food shop. He is dying slowly under the crown. She has a fever. The episode could be a horror short. It is not. It is, instead, a story about two people walking through an apocalypse, making each other feel safe for an afternoon. That is what Camus said the answer to the absurd looked like. Not denial, not transcendence. Just a refusal to surrender the small acts of attention. Two people in the rubble singing a sitcom song. Marceline, watching this from the future as she tells the story to Finn and Jake, is the proof that the gesture worked. She made it through. She survived. She became, eventually, the rock musician sitting in her own living room 1,000 years later, telling the story to a boy who has no idea what a sitcom is, while a transformed Simon sits in the corner trying to dunk a basketball into a hoop. Adventure Time refuses, every time it touches this material, to let you read it as straightforwardly tragic. It is also funny. The Ice King in the present day is goofy. Marcy is patient with him. Finn and Jake do not understand, but they listen. Life keeps going. Now hold that thought, because here is where Marceline becomes more interesting than a standard Camus reading would let her be. The Sisyphus story works because Sisyphus is a finite being. The image of the boulder rolling back down has weight because Sisyphus does not get to pick a different hill. He does not get to die out of the punishment. He is permanent in his task. Marceline, like Sisyphus, is permanent. She does not die out of the situation. She has the immortality, by the way, before the Mushroom War, because her father is the Lord of Evil and her mother was already gone. She did not become deathless when civilization ended. She was deathless when civilization ended. She just was, suddenly, a deathless small child in a world that had stopped having anywhere safe to go. The question that the show, slowly, across its entire run, is asking about her is what happens to a Sisyphus who actually has time to keep rolling the boulder forever. The Stoic philosophers, who wrote in the centuries around the start of the Common Era in Rome and Greece, had a concept they called amor fati, love of fate. The phrase usually associated with Friedrich Nietzsche centuries later, but Nietzsche himself was reading the Stoics. The Stoic move was to argue that your suffering is not what makes your life bad. Your relationship to the suffering is what makes your life bad. The Stoics taught a kind of brutal acceptance. Accept the things you cannot change. Pay attention to the things you can. Do not waste your finite time mourning the universe for being what it is. But again, the Stoics, like Camus, were writing for finite people. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, kept his journal of Stoic exercises during a war he expected to die in. The urgency of the Stoic project comes partly from the fact that the project will end soon. There is something almost tactical about the Stoic embrace of fate. It is a way of getting a finite life into a stable shape so that you can live it well in the time you have. She is going to keep being here. The scene in Simon and Marcy, the singing of the Cheers song, is in her case not a one-time effort to find peace in a doomed afternoon. It is a habit she is going to carry forward century after century in different combinations of company with different people who will all eventually die or be forgotten or lose themselves the way Simon lost himself. What does amor fati mean for someone for whom fate keeps being more fate? What does Sisyphus look like when he has to actually do this? Not as a thought experiment, but as a 1,000-year career. The answer, Adventure Time slowly converges on especially in the Stakes miniseries, which aired on Cartoon Network from November 16th through November 19th, 2015, is that the answer cannot be only acceptance. Acceptance is not enough across that time scale. You also need a specific kind of attention. You need to keep being capable of being moved. You need, in some sense, to keep being capable of writing and singing the small song. The capacity is not infinite, it can wear down. The miniseries Stakes is in part about her trying to reset herself because the wear is real, even for her. That is what the post-war flashbacks are doing in the architecture of the show. They are not just backstory, they are the show's evidence that this is the disposition Marceline keeps. From the very beginning of the rest of her life, after the world ended, she was the kind of person who could be helped by a half-broken man singing the sitcom theme to her in a ruined city. She kept that disposition. She built her life on it. The show, every time it gives you another flashback, is saying the same thing in different costumes. Look, she kept the small things. She kept Hambo, the teddy bear, until it was stolen, and then she searched for it. She kept the note from Simon. She kept the photographs of her mother. She kept her bass, which is the same base she has had for centuries. Family built, family haunted. She is the woman with the careful inventory. She is the curator of an enormous private museum of objects no one else thinks are valuable, because no one else remembers what they are for. And under all of it, every time, the question Camus raised stays underneath. Why keep doing this? Why keep paying attention? Why keep singing? The show's answer, given gently and across 280 episodes, plus the spin-off Distant Lands, is that she does not really have another option that she can live with. She tried, briefly, in Stakes to give it up. We will get to that, but what she cannot do, what she has discovered she cannot do, is be the kind of immortal who stops caring. Once you have spent 1,000 years being the witness, witnessing has become what you are. To stop would not be peace. It would be a different and worse kind of disappearance. There is something in the Cheers song that deserves another minute of attention, because the choice was not random. The Cheers theme is, in the original American sitcom that aired from 1982 through 1993, a song about a bar in Boston where regulars come every night to escape their problems. The lyrics, written by Gary Portnoy and Judy Hart-Angelo, describe the experience of getting away from your daytime life by going to a place where the bartender knows your name. The song was already an icon of cozy familiarity by the time the writers of Adventure Time chose to use it. The choice of that song, in a post-apocalyptic flashback in a children's cartoon, is doing several things at once. First, it is letting the writers point at the world that has just ended without showing it directly. The Mushroom War is rarely depicted on screen. We do not see the bombs, we do not see the negotiations that failed. We do not see the bodies. The show, instead, points at the lost world by letting Simon hum a song that came from that world. The song is The World. The song is the only artifact left of the civilization that made it. By singing it, Simon is keeping something of that civilization alive, briefly, in a tent in the rubble. Second, the song is a statement about what kind of comfort a finite person can offer. The Cheers theme says, in essence, that there is a place where you belong. There is a place where someone knows you. The song was, in its original context, a fantasy of urban communal warmth in modern America. It was selling the idea of a bar as a safe room. To sing it in a destroyed America is to deliberately make a small, tragic statement. The bar does not exist anymore. The community in the bar is dead. The very concept of a Boston is gone. But the longing the song expresses, the longing to be known, is still alive here between an old man and a sick child in a tent. This is, again, what Camus said about the absurd response. You do not deny the situation. You do not pretend the bar is still there. You sing the song anyway. You sing it because the longing the song expresses is itself something you can keep. The song is the residue. The song is what is left after the bar is gone. There is a related thread in 20th century philosophy that came out of the Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist whose memoir Man's Search for Meaning, published in 1946, has remained one of the most widely read books in moral psychology. Frankl, who survived the camps, came out of the experience with a thesis he called logotherapy. The thesis was that human beings can endure almost any amount of suffering if the suffering has meaning. The reverse is also true. A person can be objectively comfortable with no immediate threats and still die inside if their life is meaningless. What kept the inmates of the camps alive, in Frankl's reading, was the ability, however small, to find a thread of meaning to pull on. A photograph kept in a pocket, a memory of a wife waiting somewhere, a line of poetry remembered. The Cheers song in Simon and Marcy is functioning as Frankel's thread of meaning. It is the small humming refrain that lets Simon, even half mad, remain enough of himself to take care of the child he has chosen to take care of. It is what gives him a project. The project is not large. The project is, get the soup, take care of Marcy, do not let her die. But it is a project, and as long as he has it, he is still a person. The crown is taking him slowly, but the crown has not yet taken him completely. The Cheers song, in some sense, is the place where the crown is being held off. There is one more layer to this scene worth making explicit, because it tells you something about what kind of show Adventure Time is. The song is, technically, Simon's last lucid offering to Marceline before the long fade. By the time of the present-day series, he can no longer reliably do this. The Ice King in I Remember You is too far gone to choose to take care of her. The Cheers song is, in effect, the last functioning act of fatherly love that Simon will perform for her. After this, the love continues, but it will be filtered through the thickening crown. Marceline keeps that song. The miniseries Stakes, 4 years later, in the show's airing schedule, will reference it. Various other episodes will reference it. She is not forgotten. She has the song in her, the way the show has been telling you, in many forms, that the past is in her. There is a passage in the writings of the contemporary philosopher Martha Nussbaum, who has spent much of her career on the moral importance of vulnerability and emotion that captures something about what is happening in this kind of scene. Nussbaum, drawing on Aristotle, has argued that one of the central features of a good human life is the capacity to be wounded by the suffering of others, and to act on that wounding. She uses the word fragility, which is also the title of one of her major books, to name this. The fragile life, in Nussbaum's reading, is not a defective life. It is a richer life. The capacity to suffer with others is what allows the deepest forms of connection. The shielded life, the life that has insulated itself from the suffering of others, is poorer. Marceline, by Nussbaum's lights, is one of the most fragile characters in animation. She has not insulated herself. She has remained, after 1,000 years, capable of being moved. She still gets red-eyed when she sees Simon. She still hums the Cheers song to herself, in episodes the writers were not even sure anyone would notice. She has not gone numb. The capacity is still on. Camus would have approved. Frankel would have approved. They are all, in different vocabularies, pointing at the same fact. To go through what she has gone through and stay tender is itself a kind of moral achievement. Section 3. Hudson Abadir's Daughter. There is an episode of Adventure Time, the Season 2 opener which aired on Cartoon Network on October 11, 2010, called It Came from the Nightosphere. It introduces Marceline's father. His name is Hudson Abadir. He is voiced by Martin Olson, who happens to be the real-life adoptive father of Olivia Olson, who voices Marceline. The cast and joke is rich. It is also, in the long run, the only joke about him. The character is, by his own self-description across multiple episodes, the Lord of Evil. He rules a place called the Nightosphere. He consumes souls. He is, the show keeps making clear, a deathless demon whose nature is not human and whose interests are not aligned with the well-being of anyone, including his daughter. At the end of It Came from the Nightosphere, when Finn plays back a song Marceline has written about her father, the song called The Fry Song, Hudson is moved enough to apologize for eating her fries when she was a child. Eating her fries, in its weird way, is in the scene compressing into a single comic image, one of the oldest moral problems in Western thought. Aristotle, writing in the 4th century before the Common Era, described in his Nicomachean Ethics a model of character formation that has more or less anchored 2,500 years of Western moral philosophy. His argument was that we are not born with our characters, we are born with potentials. Our characters are made out of the actions we repeatedly take. A person who repeatedly tells the truth becomes a truthful person. A person who repeatedly takes more than their share becomes a greedy person. A person who repeatedly eats their daughter's fries becomes the kind of person who eats their daughter's fries. For Aristotle, the project of being a good person was not about following rules. It was about so consistently practicing certain dispositions that you eventually became those dispositions. Virtue, in the Aristotelian sense, is character. Character is the residue of habit. That is the theory of human personhood. Hudson Abadir is not human. The show is careful about this. He is something older than human civilization. He existed, the show implies, before time. He is not subject to ordinary moral development, because he is not subject to ordinary development at all. He is a thing that consumes souls. That is what he does. The show does not soften this. He genuinely sucks the souls out of the people of U when he is given a chance. Marceline is half him. The half that is him is the immortal half, the deathless part, the part that does not age. The part that the implied biology of the show suggests comes from him. Her mother Elise, who appears late in the show's run and is given more focus in distant lands, was a human woman who lived during the period of the Mushroom War. The mother dies, the father continues, the mother is gone, the father is in the basement, ruling hell, occasionally inviting Marceline back to take over the family business. Now apply Aristotle if virtue is the residue of habit and Marceline is, by the show's own internal logic, only halfway in the moral universe of habit. What does that say about her capacity to become someone other than her father? This is perhaps the most interesting moral question Adventure Time poses. It is a question about inheritance, not just genetic inheritance. The show is not interested mostly in genetics. It is interested in moral inheritance. The question of whether evil, given enough generations, becomes a kind of structural condition that the next generation cannot quite escape. Whether the daughter of the Lord of Evil can become a woman who, in episode after episode, is shown gently caring for a dying old man, lying with her head on a pumpkin patch beside her ex-girlfriend, writing songs of patient witness for half-mad strangers. Whether character can override origin. The show's answer is yes. The show's answer is yes, and it takes about a decade of episodes to fully demonstrate it. It is worth pausing here because this is one of the places where Adventure Time is doing more sophisticated moral philosophy than most of the criticism written about the show acknowledges. There is a long tradition in Western literature of villains being read as essentially formed by their bad parent. The bad parent did the bad thing, and now the child is the bad thing. There is also, in opposition to that, a tradition of redemption stories where the child overcomes the bad parent in a single dramatic confrontation. Marceline's relationship with Hunson is neither. Hunson keeps coming back. He never really stops being the Lord of Evil. He never undergoes a moral transformation in any meaningful sense. He just keeps showing up in Marceline's life in episode after episode, and Marceline keeps managing him. She does not destroy him. She does not redeem him. She does not become him. She just refuses, again and again, to take the path he is offering her. In the Season 4 episode Daddy's Little Monster, which is the second time the show seriously focuses on Hunson, he tricks her into putting on the Nightosphere amulet, which would turn her into the new Lord of Evil. She wears it for a while. Her hair changes, her fangs grow, she becomes what her father is. Then, halfway through the episode, when she sees what wearing the amulet is making her do, she takes it off. She keeps her body, and her face, and her name. She refuses the inheritance. That refusal is not a one-time event. The show makes it cumulative. Every time her father comes back, in every episode he appears in, she refuses again. The episode It Came from the Nightosphere is a refusal. Daddy's Little Monster is a refusal. Marcy and Hunson, which aired late in the show's run, is a refusal. The pattern is the point. The pattern is what Aristotle would have predicted. Repeatedly choosing against your origin who you will be eventually crystallizes into who you are. The phrase comes from a famous 1976 exchange between the philosophers Bernard Williams and Thomas Nagel. Both were thinking about how much of our moral standing is actually within our control and how much is just the result of where we happen to start. Nagel's particular concern was that ordinary morality assumes a kind of clean responsibility that, when you look at it carefully, falls apart. We tend to think people deserve credit and blame for their character, but character is shaped in large part by accidents of birth, family, and circumstance. The person who never has an opportunity to commit a crime is not necessarily more virtuous than the one who does. They are just luckier. Marceline is in some ways an extreme stress test of the moral luck question. She did not pick her father. She did not pick to be born into a lineage of soul eaters. She did not pick to be the only living daughter of the Lord of Evil. She did not pick the long life that gave her endless temptations to stop caring about anyone. By the time she meets Finn and Jake, she has already, by the show's chronology, lived long enough that her moral character was decided centuries before Finn was born. Her practice of being decent has been compounding for 1,000 years. There is something almost mathematical about the suggestion the show is making. If Aristotle is right, that character is the long residue of choices, then Marceline has accumulated more residue than any other character in Adventure Time. By sheer hours of practice, she has been being herself longer than the Candy Kingdom has existed. Her decency, by this logic, should be the most stable trait in Ooh. And it is. The show treats her, by its end, as one of the most quietly trustworthy figures in the whole world. She is the one Finn confides in when he is older. She is the one Simon forgives. This is perhaps a much more interesting reading of moral inheritance than the one most stories give. Adventure Time is not saying that you can simply pick to be different from your bad parent. It is saying that picking to be different from your bad parent is a long, slow, repeated act, and that the act is what you are. There is no single moment of redemption. There is just the practice. The practice is the thing. It is worth saying also that the show does not pretend Hudson is fully without love for her. He is not a cartoon villain in that simple sense. He is something more uncomfortable. He genuinely, in his demonic way, cares about his daughter. He just cares about her in the only mode he is capable of, which is the mode of someone whose nature is to consume. He invites her back to the family business, not in his mind to harm her, but to make sure she is doing well by the only standard of doing well he knows. The show lets him be sympathetic, in flashes the way real bad parents are sometimes sympathetic. They do love. They just love in a way that is corrosive, and the love does not redeem the corrosion. Marceline has been figuring this out for 1,000 years. She has decided what to do with that kind of love. She lets it exist. She does not pretend it is not there. She does not lie to herself about her father. She also does not move into the nightosphere. She keeps writing songs. She keeps petting cats. She keeps showing up at Bubblegum's lab. She keeps carrying Hambo. This is what mature, moral life looks like in Aristotle's sense, not the absence of inherited bad. The patient daily refusal to let inherited bad become the practice that makes you. You can love a parent who hurt you and also choose over and over to be the kind of person who would not have hurt you. The choosing is not a single moment. It is what your days are made out of. There is one more thing about Hudson worth saying, because it is something Adventure Time, very late in its run, returns to in an episode called Marcy and Hudson, which appeared in the show's 10th and final season in 2017. The episode is, from the outside, a kind of breezy domestic short. Hudson is summoned to Ooh from the nightosphere by Peppermint Butler, who needs Hudson's demonic energy to power up a new sword for Finn. Hudson agrees, on the condition that he be allowed to spend a day visiting his daughter while he is on the surface. Marceline, as expected, is not enthusiastic. What the episode then does, across its 11 minutes, is just let them spend an afternoon together. He gives her a t-shirt, they hang out on her couch, they argue about old grievances, they reach a kind of strained peace. He returns to the nightosphere at sundown. By the standards of plot, almost nothing happens. By the standards of moral philosophy, something rather important happens. The episode shows what we have been describing. The pattern of refusal that Marceline has built into her own life is now stable enough that her father can visit and she can be his daughter for an afternoon, and at the end of the afternoon, she will still be herself. That is not a small thing. There are real human beings in real human lives who cannot manage this with their parents. The visit collapses them back into who they were as a child. The visit reactivates the old hurts in a way that takes weeks to recover from. Marceline can have the afternoon. She can let him be her father. In the limited way he is capable of being a father. And at sundown, she can wave at him as he descends back into hell. She is solid enough now that the visit does not destabilize her. This is, by the way, also what Aristotle's view of mature virtue looks like in the Aristotelian sources themselves. The fully virtuous person, in Aristotle, does not avoid difficult situations. They face them and respond well. The mark of someone who has mastered a virtue is that the virtue can be exercised under pressure, in real time, with the difficult parties present, without falling apart. A person who is good only when nothing is at stake is not really good. They are just sheltered. The test of virtue is contact with the friction. Marceline is, at this point in the show's chronology, a person who can have her father in her house for the afternoon and stay herself. There is also a much darker thinker on inheritance worth bringing in here, because the show is gesturing towards something he wrote about, even if it is not citing him directly. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, writing in the late 19th century, was deeply preoccupied with the question of how a person could become themselves, rather than merely the residue of what their parents and culture had shaped them into. His answer, scattered across his late books and his unpublished notebooks, is hard to summarize. But one of the central images he used was the idea of self-overcoming. The Übermensch, the so-called overman of his late works, was the figure who could face the fact of inheritance, including bad inheritance, and become themselves anyway, without resentment, without the need to revise the past, without bitterness toward those who shaped them. Nietzsche thought the great trap, the thing that destroys most people morally, is what he called ressentiment. Ressentiment, in his German, is roughly the slow, corrosive grudge a person holds against the people and circumstances that wronged them. The grudge is understandable. It is also, in his analysis, deeply self-poisoning. To hold resentment is to give the people who hurt you continued power over your life. It is to never quite leave the room they put you in. It is to keep refighting the old fight in your head decades after the fight is over. Marceline is one of the rare characters in popular fiction who is given a parent who genuinely is the Lord of Evil and who, despite that, does not seem to carry significant resentment about it. She is annoyed by Hudson. She is sometimes hurt by him. She does not let him into her core. But she also is not corrupted by hating him. She has, in the Nietzschean sense, achieved a kind of solidity that allows her to wave him off without rage. This is, again, very rare in fiction. Most stories about evil parents are stories where the protagonist either becomes the parent or destroys the parent. The protagonist either inherits the curse or breaks the curse. In Adventure Time, neither of these things is what happens. Marceline is neither destroyed by her father nor obsessed with destroying him. She has reached a third position. Indifference is not the right word, because she still cares about him in the limited way that caring about him is possible. The right word in moral psychology might be something like serene refusal. She knows what he is. She does not pretend he is something else. She's also not consumed by what he is. She just keeps doing her own life next to his, and at the end of his visit, she goes back to her own house and keeps making songs. If you want a model of how to live with a difficult inheritance, this is one of the better ones to study, even though it is wrapped in cartoon vampirism. The model is roughly, do not pretend the inheritance is not there, do not destroy yourself trying to undo it, do not let it shape you in retaliatory mode. Just keep doing the good thing you have been doing. The good thing, repeated long enough, becomes you. And the inheritance, refused long enough, becomes a fact about your past rather than a fact about your present. We will move on because there is still a lot of her left to look at, but it is worth holding this image too. Marceline at her father's table, eating with him, smiling at him, being his daughter in some real sense, and walking out at the end of the meal still herself. He has not changed. He will not change. She has changed by exactly the amount that is required to keep being someone he did not get to make. Section 4. Bonnie Belle. For most of Adventure Time's run, the relationship between Marceline and Princess Bubblegum is the most carefully managed mystery in the show. The first episode, where they are openly hostile, is in the third season episode What Was Missing, which aired on Cartoon Network on September 26, 2011. It is the episode where they form a band with Finn and Jake to defeat a magic gatekeeper who has stolen everyone's most precious possessions. The episode is structured around a song that Marceline writes on the spot, called I'm Just Your Problem, that is so transparently a romantic lament that in the years following the episode's airing, it became one of the most discussed songs in animated television. The episode also reveals in a small detail near the end that the magic gatekeeper has stolen nothing from Marceline. She has tagged along on the recovery mission for no reason, except that she wanted to see Bonnibel. The other characters do not understand this. The episode makes a quiet joke about it. Marceline gets embarrassed when she is caught wanting to be there, transforms into a giant monster, and chases everyone out of her house in fake rage. Princess Bubblegum in the same episode is shown at one point wearing, as a nightshirt, a black band t-shirt that Marceline gave her at a concert years before. Each woman, in other words, has kept the other's clothes. Adventure Time, between 2011 and the series finale Come Along With Me, which aired on Cartoon Network on Labor Day, September 3rd, 2018, slowly built out the relationship between these two characters into one of the most fully realized depictions of long-term, on and off, decade-spanning love that animated television has ever produced. The relationship was confirmed in the finale. The two of them kissed on screen. Marceline, in the moment that the kiss happens, says aloud something close to the line, "Even back when we weren't talking, I was so afraid that something bad would happen to you and I wouldn't be there to protect you. I don't want to lose you again." The relationship was developed further in the Distant Lands Special Obsidian, which streamed on HBO Max on November 19th, 2020, where the two of them are shown living together in domestic ordinariness, having breakfast, fighting over old wounds, going on a road trip, working out whether they can stay. To talk about Bonnibel and Marceline, philosophically, you have to talk about what love is for an immortal. The bulk of the philosophical literature on romantic love, from Plato's Symposium through to contemporary work, has assumed mortal lovers. It has assumed scarcity. The basic structural condition for most theorizing about love is that you do not have unlimited time, and the urgency of the love is part of what gives the love its weight. Plato had his Aristophanes character claim that humans were originally double-bodied creatures who were split apart. and that love is the longing to find the other half before death takes us. Even the modern lyric tradition is full of this. Most love poems are written under the implicit clock of mortality, time's winged chariot, to his coy mistress. When both of the lovers are deathless, what is the structure? She is the princess of the candy kingdom, but she is also the originator of the candy people. She is, biologically, a piece of pink sentient gum that has been gradually shaping itself into a person for centuries. Her age is implied to be substantial. She is the inventor and the ruler of a kingdom that did not exist 1,000 years ago. The series shows her as a small child in flashbacks when she was first growing into being a person. By the time of the present-day series, she is, if not as old as Marceline, easily a century or more of age. So both of them have time. Both of them have, in principle, more time than most love stories ever get to look at. The Distant Lands Special Obsidian is, in many ways, the show's argument that infinite time does not solve the problems of love. It actually concentrates them. In the special, Marceline and Bonnibel are living together. They are domestic. They are happy in the daily way. Then Marceline has to leave, briefly, on a quest that pulls her back into the Glass Kingdom, a place she and Bonnibel previously visited when they were younger, when they had a fight that defined the next phase of their relationship. The flashback structure of the special is one of its most impressive achievements. It cuts between the present, where the two of them are together, and the past, where they are breaking up. The breakup, as it is rendered, is not driven by ordinary romantic infidelity or ordinary romantic boredom. It is driven by the question of whether two immortal women who love each other can actually stand to be exposed to each other long enough to see all of each other. This is, in fact, a problem that contemporary philosophers of love have been thinking about, mostly under the heading of self-disclosure. The American philosopher Harry Frankfurt, in his short late book, The Reasons of Love, argued that to love someone is to be vulnerable to them in a way that other relationships do not require. The lover's interests become merged with your own. You are exposed. You can be hurt by them in ways that strangers cannot hurt you. Frankfurt thought this was actually one of the structural goods of love. The exposure is part of why it matters. Love is, on his view, not optional in the way a hobby is optional. It is the thing that gives a life its caring shape. But Frankfurt was theorizing for normal lovers, for someone who has 50 years of merged interests at most, before death pulls the cord. For Marceline and Bonnibel, the exposure is potentially open-ended. They could be exposing themselves to each other across centuries. The wounds from a fight in the 18th equivalent year of their relationship are still wounds in the 400th. There is no statute of limitations. The breakup that the special depicts is, if you watch it carefully, about two people who have realized they cannot work out their problems on a normal human timescale. They can postpone working them out. They can avoid each other for what for a normal couple would be a lifetime, and for them is just a long pause. The Glass Kingdom flashbacks show two women who do not know how to be in the same room with each other anymore, and they have already been in plenty of rooms together. The future is not going to make it easier just by being long. This is a tonal shift in the way love stories are usually told. Most love stories assume that time will heal a relationship if you let it. The longer view will resolve the short conflict. Marceline and Bonnibel, in Obsidian, are explicitly facing the opposite condition. The longer the view, the more they have to confront, every time that the wounds still hurt. Time alone does not soften the cuts. They have to actually do the soft work in the present, on each other. The way the special resolves this is, structurally, modest. It does not give them a final speech. It does not give them a dramatic confrontation. It gives them instead a song called Eternity With You, near the end, which Marceline plays for Bonnibel after they have worked through, again, the same set of wounds they have worked through before. The song is quiet. The animation slows down. The two of them dance together, briefly, in their kitchen. What the song is saying, in the show's own grammar, is this: eternity is not a guarantee. Eternity is a thing you have to pick again every day. Loving an immortal does not mean you have already won. It means you have signed up for a project that, for as long as both of you keep choosing it, will keep being the project. This is, philosophically, a position that goes back at least to the late 20th century thinker Iris Murdoch, who wrote a great deal about love as moral attention. Murdoch thought love, at its core, was a discipline of seeing the other person clearly, not the version of them you wish for, not the version of them that is actually there. She used the example of a mother-in-law, slowly over years, learning to see her daughter-in-law as a real person and not as a stereotype. The work was not loud. The work was internal. The mother-in-law did not change anything about her external behavior. She just started more and more, paying real attention. Marceline and Bonnibel across the entire span of the show are doing this. They are learning to see each other. The fight in the early seasons is the consequence of Marceline feeling unseen. The reconciliation in the later seasons is the consequence of both of them actually seeing each other for what they have become. Bonnibel, by the time of Obsidian, has begun to see that Marceline is not just a hot, moody musician. She is a very old, very tired witness who, when she rests her head on a shoulder, is resting 1,000 years of nights against you. Marceline, by the same point, has begun to see that Bonnibel is not just a controlling scientist princess. She is a child who built her own kingdom out of fear of being alone, and who has been pretending to be in charge for so long that she has forgotten she is also small. When the kiss happens, in the series finale, the kiss is the result of all of this. It is not introduced by a love at first sight beat. It is not introduced by a misunderstanding resolve beat. It is introduced by the simple mechanical fact that Marceline has just rescued Bonnibel from being crushed by a giant golem, and they are standing close, and Marceline says she does not want to lose her again, and then they kiss. The "again" is the most important word in the sentence. They have lost each other before. They have been not talking for stretches of time longer than the lifespans of most relationships. The kiss is not a beginning. It is a re-entry. It is the kind of moment that only makes sense if you grant the show its own internal time, which is enormous. There is a reading of this kiss, which is widespread on the internet and which is correct as far as it goes, that focuses on the cultural significance of putting a same-gender romantic kiss in a children's animated series finale. That reading is true. The kiss is a milestone. It mattered for representation, and it changed what was possible for the next generation of animated shows, including Steven Universe, which was developed by Rebecca Sugar after she left Adventure Time, and which she had originally been pitching in part in conversation with the relationship that was being built between Marceline and Bonnibel. But the kiss is also philosophically a different kind of milestone. It is one of the rare moments in popular animation where a romantic resolution has been earned by patient depiction of long-term moral attention. The two characters have, by the time of the kiss, demonstrated the capacity to see each other and to keep choosing each other across a span of time that, by mortal standards, is geological. They have failed each other, they have come back, they have failed each other again, they have come back again. The kiss is the visible surface of an underwater architecture that the show has been building for 8 years. If you wanted to take a single moment from Adventure Time to teach what Iris Murdoch meant by love as moral attention, this is the moment. Two people, exposed, who have been doing the long work, and who have arrived after hundreds of years of botched starts, at a quiet kiss that is not the start of anything new, but the recognition of what has been there underneath. It is also, by the way, the most efficiently devastating thing the show ever did to its viewers. Anyone who cried watching that moment was not crying because of the kiss itself. They were crying because the kiss was the visible sign that the long thing they had been hoping for, on the level of moral attention, had actually been earned. It is also worth pausing on the structure of Obsidian, because the show, in that special, makes one of its most adult statements about love. It contains 7 songs. The 2 most important, structurally, are Woke Up and Monster. Both are sung by Marceline. Both are sung at moments where the present action of the special pauses to flash back into the breakup that the two of them went through decades earlier during their first visit to the Glass Kingdom. Woke Up is the breakup song. In the flashback structure, we see Marceline, much younger looking than her present self, performing the song in a small underground concert space. The song is a deliberate cruelty. She is performing it to Bonnibel, who is in the front row, and she knows the lyrics will sting. She is angry, she is hurt. She is making a public song out of a private wound, in the way that musicians often do, and she does not yet have the wisdom or the patience to wait. She lets the song be a weapon. This is, at the level of the show's psychology, a deeply familiar moment. Many people in their 20s have done a version of Woke Up. They have used art, or social media, or public storytelling to land a hit on someone they used to love. The hit feels good in the moment. It also, in retrospect, costs more than it gives. It is the kind of choice you can only really make if you are not yet wise enough to predict that you will, later, be the person who has to live with having made it. Marceline, in the present tense scenes of Obsidian, is the person who has to live with having made it. She is now hundreds of years older. She is now in a domestic relationship with the person she once aimed the song at. She is, in the present timeline, embarrassed by Woke Up, in the way that mature people are embarrassed by things they did when they were less mature. The special does not flinch from this. It lets her be embarrassed. It lets the song be revisited not as a triumphant breakup banger, but as a piece of evidence about a person she has since outgrown. There is something philosophically rich about a children's animated special that takes the time to depict a character cringing at her own old work. Most stories do not bother. Most stories use art as evidence of who a character is, full stop. To use art as evidence of a stage of becoming, a stage you can leave behind, is rarer. Then comes Monster, which is the special's most important song. Monster is sung by Marceline near the end of the special, in a moment when she is asked to confront, again, the fact that the version of herself she dislikes the most, the angry, sharp, harm-doing version, is still inside her. She has not abolished it. The monster is in her. The song is her admission of this in front of Bonnie Bell, who has come to the Glass Kingdom with her precisely to face the same difficult truths from her own past. The song's argument, paraphrased, is that loving someone does not delete the parts of you that are hard to love. The parts that are hard to love are still there. They will always be there. The only honest way to be loved is to be loved by someone who has seen those parts. The only honest way to love someone is to see those parts of them. This is, philosophically, a position that has been articulated by many thinkers, but it is worth mentioning specifically the contemporary writer and clinical psychologist Esther Perel, whose work on long-term romantic relationships has been influential in the last 20 years. Perel has argued against a kind of pop psychology myth of finding the right person, that mature love is not the absence of difficulty. It is the willingness to keep showing up to the difficulty in good faith with someone who is also showing up. The fantasy of effortless love is in her work mostly a fantasy. The work is the love. Marceline and Bonnibel in Obsidian are doing this work in real time with several centuries of evidence behind it. They are not pretending the breakup did not happen. They are not pretending the woke up song was kind. They are also not pretending the breakup means they cannot try again. They are picking, in the present, to be the kind of people who try again. The show, when it lets them dance to eternity with you at the end, is not telling you they have solved the problem. It is telling you that they have figured out how to live inside the problem. That is, in a real sense, the most honest possible ending for a long-term, immortal love story. There is no problem solving, there is only continuing. The continuing, mutually willed, is what makes the love real. There is also, embedded in Obsidian, a much smaller philosophical question worth lingering on. The question is, what happens to the very young version of you? The version that did the bad thing that hurt the person you now love. Where does that version go? Standard Western moral thought, most of it Christian influenced, has tended to suggest that the young you is forgiven, gradually, as you grow into the adult you. The bad action is a stain that the slow exercise of better action can scrub. Therapy, in the contemporary mode, often does a softer version of this. The therapist helps you rewrite the narrative of your past so that the bad young you is folded into a coherent story in which the bad young you was, in some real sense, doing their best with what they had. The reframing makes the wound less raw. The show offers a different option. The Everything Stays lullaby, which we will return to in detail in our final section, suggests that the young you does not have to be forgiven or reframed. The young you can simply still be there, inside you as a fact neither admired nor undone, just held. Marceline does not get to delete the version of herself that wrote Woke Up. The version is in her. It is still part of who she is. What she gets to do is grow another version on top of it and let the older version be a layer in the geology, not the surface. This is closer philosophically to a Buddhist position than a Christian one. Several Buddhist traditions have argued that the work of moral growth is not undoing the past self, but adding new structures of attention to the present self. The past does not need to be eliminated. It needs to be acknowledged, accepted, and contained. The acknowledgement is what creates the space for the next layer. Forgiveness, in this frame, is not really erasure. It is the willingness of the older self to keep carrying the younger self without disowning her. Bonnibel, by the end of Obsidian, has, in this Buddhist sense, forgiven Marceline. She has not pretended Woke Up did not happen. She has chosen to keep loving the woman in whom Woke Up is a layer. Marceline, similarly, has accepted that her own younger self is still part of the package. The two of them are, at the end of the special, walking toward an indefinite future together, in which they will both keep accumulating layers, in which they will both keep needing the other to carry the layers along with them. This is, again, what mature love between immortals would have to look like. If it could exist at all, there is no clean self that can be loved free of past mistakes. There is only the ongoing accumulation. with another person willing to receive it. That is what the kiss in the finale was the visible surface of. That is what the Distant Land special was the elaboration of. That is what it has taken 8 years of episodes and 1 streaming special to fully demonstrate. Section 5. The songs she sings to herself. Adventure Time has a lot of songs in it. Most of the songs are short, most of them are funny. Most of them are designed to last about 30 seconds, get a joke across, and end. Marceline's songs are the exception. She has, across the entire show, several songs that are, in animation terms, very long. The Fry song, I'm Just Your Problem, I Remember You. The songs in the Stakes miniseries, the songs in Obsidian, each of them clocks in well past the 30-second cap. Each of them slows the show down. Each of them changes the tone of the episode it is in, often dramatically. This is not an accident of writing. Songwriting on Adventure Time is structurally tied to her character. Marceline is canonically a musician. She plays a bass guitar that is shaped like an axe and is, in the show's lore, made out of a family heirloom. She writes most of the songs she performs. She performs them in clubs in the Candy Kingdom. She performs them in her own house alone. She performs them sometimes just to herself. The fact that she is the show's main musician is not just a fun design choice. It is a moral choice the writers have made about her. To understand why, we have to talk about what music does in a philosophical sense, because the show is deliberately using music to mean something specific about her. Existentialist philosophers in the 20th century, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, argued that human beings are not born with fixed essences. They become themselves through their projects. Sartre's famous line, "Existence precedes essence," was an argument that, unlike a knife or a cup, a person does not come into the world already designed for a purpose. The person is here. The purpose is what the person makes by what they do. Beauvoir extended this with great care into the question of how a person's projects make them free. To be free, in the existentialist sense, is to keep generating yourself. For Sartre and Beauvoir, the ongoing projects we engage in are how we exist as persons. They are not decoration on top of a self that is already there. They are the self. We make ourselves up by what we do, by what we create, by what we choose to keep showing up for. Marceline, with her songs, is the most explicit version of this in Adventure Time. She is, more than any other character, a self in the existentialist sense. She is the only major character in the show who has a recurring artistic practice that is not framed as a hobby or a quirk. It is framed as how she keeps existing. Look at the songs themselves. The Fry song, written by Rebecca Sugar for the Season 2 opener that introduced Hunson, is a song about a small grievance. Her father ate her fries. The grievance on its surface is comic. The song treats it that way. But underneath, what the song is doing is converting a pattern of paternal absence into a thing she can hold and aim. The song does not change Hunson. Hunson is not affected by the song. The song does not even remind Hunson of the incident. Hunson has more or less forgotten the fries. But Marceline still has the song. The song is hers. It is the artifact she made out of the wound. The song is the project that made the wound make sense. I'm Just Your Problem, written for the same Season 3 episode as the band formation plot, is doing something almost identical for the romantic wound with Bonnibel. The song does not resolve the wound. Bonnibel does not in the moment of the song change. The song just exists in the world as a thing Marceline made out of her hurt. Once she has made it, the hurt has somewhere to go. It has a shape. It has a 4.5-minute container. It is hers. This, in the existentialist reading, is what artistic work does. It does not abolish suffering. It does not make life painless. It transforms suffering into something that has been chosen, named, and given form. The making of the song is the act of becoming the kind of person who can have made it. There is no Marceline without the song. The song is part of how Marceline exists. Now think about how many songs she has made across the show. Think about how often, in episode after episode, the camera finds her sitting alone in her house, on her couch, picking at the bass, working on something. Think about the Stakes miniseries, where she sings the song Everything Stays alongside her mother in a flashback to the post-war period, where the song is the only stable thing two people can hand each other in a dying world. Think about Obsidian, where her song Monster, which she performs in the Glass Kingdom, is also the song that, secretly, becomes the show's most concentrated articulation of the difficulty of letting someone love you when you do not believe you deserve it. Marceline is, the show is gently arguing, a 1,000-year-old being who has stayed a person, specifically because she has kept making songs. The songs are not how she expresses her humanity. The songs are the thing that has made her humanity continuous across a span of time when no other technique would have worked. This connects to a wider question that thinkers like the German philosopher Theodor Adorno worried about. Adorno spent much of his career thinking about whether art was possible at all in the modern world, especially after the catastrophes of the 20th century. He famously and provocatively asked whether it was possible to write poetry after Auschwitz. He later softened the claim, but the question stayed with him. He wanted to know whether the impulse to make beautiful things in the wake of horror was an evasion of horror or an honest response to it. Adorno's eventual answer was complicated. He thought a lot of post-war art was an evasion, but he also thought that the most honest art was the kind that did not pretend the horror was not there, that did not flatten the world into reassurance. That was willing to live in the difficulty. He used the late string quartets of Beethoven as one of his examples. The late quartets, he argued, do not console. They do not pretty up reality. They do not promise a happy ending. What they do is hold open a kind of attention, a kind of seeing that mortal life would otherwise be too quick for. Marceline's songs are, in their goofy way, an answer to Adorno's question. Hers is a music after the apocalypse in the most literal sense. Her songs were, in many cases, written in the actual ruins of an actual destroyed civilization. There is a song she sings in the Stakes flashback that her mother sings to her. And the song is a song about how things change without permission, and the place in the world where the song is being sung is a tent in the rubble. That is not a metaphor. That is the literal post-Auschwitz position transposed onto a children's cartoon. Marceline's songs are, at their root, the songs of a person who is not pretending the catastrophe did not happen, and who is also not going to stop singing because it did. You can hear this if you actually sit and listen to the songs as a body of work. They are not anthems, they do not resolve, they do not reach for triumphant endings. They tend to end on minor chords or unresolved phrases. They tend to leave the wound visible, they tend to be in conversation with the trouble, rather than triumphing over it. They are honest in the Adorno sense. They are living in the difficulty. There is, in fact, a recurring image in the Adventure Time storyboards worth picturing for a moment, because it is one of the most quietly defining images of her. Marceline alone in her house, late at night, the lights are low, there is a soft, pinkish glow from a lamp. There is a couch, a fridge, a few photographs on the wall. She is sitting cross-legged, she is holding the bass. She is not playing for a crowd. There is no one else in the room. She is humming something quietly into the air. The episode has stopped to let you see this. That image, repeated across the show, is the show's argument for what she is. She is not fundamentally a vampire queen. She is not fundamentally the daughter of the Lord of Evil. She is not fundamentally the witness for Simon, or the on and off girlfriend of Bonneville, or the second most powerful being in Oo. She is, fundamentally, the kind of person who, when no one else is around, sits with a bass and works on a song. That is the Sartrean essence. That is what her existence has built. The songs are not what she does, they are who she is. There is also a thread in the philosophy of art worth mentioning here, because Marceline's case is unusually direct about it. The thread runs through several 20th century writers, but is most cleanly stated by the German philosopher Hans Georg Gadamer, who argued that a work of art is not fundamentally an object to be looked at. It is an event in time. The work happens when it is performed. The performance is the work. The painting on the wall is, in this view, a kind of dormant version of itself, waiting for a viewer to make it complete. The poem on the page is similarly dormant until someone reads it. For songs, the dormancy is even more obvious. A song that no one is singing is not really happening. It is a recipe for an event that has not occurred yet. The song becomes itself when someone gives it a voice. Marceline's songs in Adventure Time are mostly short events that happen in single episodes. Most of them are not in the world of the show recorded. There is no Spotify in Oo. There is no archive. The songs happen in the room she sings them in. After they happen, they become memory. The memory is held in the show by whoever was listening, and by Marceline herself. This means Marceline's body of work is not, in the conventional sense, a body of work at all. It is a body of events. She has been making music for centuries. Most of the music has not survived. There is no archive. There are no demos. There are only the moments in those rooms with those audiences when those events occurred. She is, in the Gadamerian sense, the only continuous link between the events. She is the archive in the form of a person. This is, by the way, why the show keeps going back to scenes of her singing alone. The scenes are doing two things at once. They are giving you the feeling of an artist in their natural state. They are also, on a structural level, showing you the only place where her 1,000-year body of work continuously exists. The body of work exists in her. She has it inside her. She is the place it is being kept. This, perhaps, is the deepest reason the show treats her with so much tenderness. She is, in a real sense, the carrier of an entire vanished culture. Most of what she has made is gone. The world that produced her songs is gone. The audiences who first heard them are gone. She is the only continuous thread between the post-apocalyptic period and the present-day land of Ooo. The show keeps her singing because the show keeps wanting to remind you that all of that is in her. When the show stops to give you the late-night image of her on her couch, holding the bass, humming, it is also stopping to remind you of the cost of being the carrier. The carrying is heavy. The carrying does not get lighter with practice. The carrying is just what she has decided to be. Existentialism, in this sense, has a tragic edge for Marceline that it does not always have for finite humans. For a normal human, the existentialist project of becoming yourself by what you do has a natural limit. The body wears out, the decisions stop, the self comes to rest in death. Complete, defined. For Marceline, the project never completes. She has to keep generating herself indefinitely, every day, with no terminal point at which the work concludes. The project of being Marceline has no draft date. It is, in the deepest sense, a project that will never be finished. The songs, then, are her way of marking the project as it continues. Each song is a checkpoint. Each song says, this is who I am tonight. This is what I have made out of being myself this week. The next week, we'll produce a different song. The week after that, a different one. None of them is the final word. None of them is the summary. They are, all of them, working notes in an open-ended creation that has been going for 1,000 years and shows no sign of stopping. We will move on because there is still a lot of her left to look at, but it is worth holding the small image. A woman in her house at night, alone, holding an axe-shaped bass, humming. Across centuries, that is what she has built out of being herself. That is what is left when everything else has been stripped of someone who is alive on purpose. Section 6, Moral Adjacent. The Stakes miniseries is, in the show's chronology, the moment Marceline asks, out loud, to be made mortal. It first aired on Cartoon Network across 4 nights from November 16th through November 19th, 2015, with 2 episodes airing each night. It is officially counted as part of Season 7 of Adventure Time, though it functions as a self-contained arc. It is the first and best of 3 miniseries the show produced in its later years. The premise is simple. Marceline has decided she does not want to be a vampire anymore. She goes to Bonnibel, who is the show's resident scientist, and asks her to extract the vampirism from her body. Bonnibel agrees. The procedure is invented for the show. It works. The vampirism leaves Marceline. It is contained, briefly but quickly escapes and reconstitutes itself in a series of older vampires who Marceline had previously defeated centuries ago and who now come back to threaten Ooo. The bulk of the miniseries is Marceline, mortal, fighting these older vampires. But all of that is the action plot. The actual plot, the philosophical plot, is what is happening to Marceline herself. What is happening to her across the 8 episodes is that she is having to learn what mortality feels like inside her own body. She gets tired in a way she has not gotten tired in centuries. She bleeds in a way that takes time to heal. She stops being able to fly. Her face in close-ups is shown looking actually exhausted, which is a state she has not been seen in before. The show is paying attention to her body as a mortal body, suddenly subject to the time pressure that Bernard Williams said was the structural condition of mortal life. There are people who think that immortality, if you could have it, would be obviously good. The desire to live forever is a basic feature of human folklore. It shows up everywhere. Every major religion has some notion of an afterlife or eternal continuation. Every major science fiction tradition has someone who wants to upload themselves. Stakes is, among other things, an argument against this intuition, in the form of a vampire who has had immortality long enough to want it gone. Why does she want it gone? The miniseries does not give a single clean answer. It gives several overlapping ones, and they accumulate in a way that by the end is more compelling than any single answer would have been. The first reason is Heideggerian. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger, writing in the early 20th century, argued in his book Being and Time that the structure of human existence is fundamentally shaped by what he called being toward death. Heidegger thought that the awareness of finitude is what gives a human life its weight. We make decisions, we choose careers, we love specific people, we care about specific projects, in part because we know we are going to run out of time. The clock is constitutive. Without it, our choices would lose their bite. Everything would be infinitely deferrable. A long-standing critique of Heidegger is that he overstates the case. Plenty of people who are not, in any vivid daily sense, aware of their own death, still manage to care about things. The clock does not have to be conscious for the choices to matter. But there is a softer version of the Heideggerian point that almost everyone agrees with. Knowing that you have a finite amount of time, even in a vague background way, focuses you. It makes you commit. It makes you treat certain things as urgent. Marceline, after 1,000 years, has been losing that focus. The Stakes miniseries shows this in a specific way. There is a flashback in the second episode, called Everything Stays, which establishes the moment when Marceline first agreed to drink blood, the moment that put her on the path to vampirism. Her mother Elise, in the flashback, sings to her a lullaby called Everything Stays, written by the show's former storyboard artist Rebecca Sugar, who was at this point already running her own show but came back specifically to write the song. The lullaby is about how things change without changing, how change leaves a residue, how the version of yourself you were yesterday is still inside the version you are today. The lullaby ends, Elise leaves, the world is post-apocalyptic. Marceline is alone. She is hungry. She becomes the kind of being who needs to drink to survive. It becomes the spine. Marceline's project in Stakes is not just to remove the vampirism, it is to figure out whether her mother's promise, that things stay even when they change, can survive a change as big as the one she is now trying to make. Can she become mortal and still be the same person who once was the small daughter being sung to? Can the residue carry her across? Heidegger's point about being toward death, refracted through Marceline's situation, is that immortality has been undermining her. Not because it is too much fun, or too lonely, or too long, although it is all of those things. It is undermining her because she has stopped being able to feel that the choices she makes are choices. She has been making them on the ground floor of forever. Forever flattens choice. Forever makes everything reversible. She wants to stop being able to do everything later. She wants to be made of decisions again. The second reason, layered on top, is more local and more poignant. It has to do with her relationship to mortal people. Marceline has been watching mortals die, in 2s and 3s and in waves, for 1,000 years. Most of the people she has loved have, by definition, ended. She has had to grieve more times than any 30-year-old human has. The people she has grown attached to in the present generation, including Finn and Jake, the brothers who are her closest friends in the present-day world, are mortals. Finn will eventually grow old. Jake will, by the show's eventual reveal, die. Bonnabelle, although effectively immortal, is also susceptible to harm in a way that is not the same as Marceline's own deathlessness. To be the only deathless person in a room of mortals is to be permanently scheduled for grief. Stakes does not say this in big speeches. The miniseries shows it. Marceline is shown in a quiet flashback at a previous mortal's funeral. The being is not named in detail. It is simply, the show suggests, one of the many people she has had to bury. The flashback is brief. It is meant to suggest that there are hundreds of these, there are entire centuries worth of these. If you keep losing people, century after century, the cost of loving the next person becomes structurally heavier. You know in advance how it'll end. You know what 100 years of caring about them will turn into. You start to flinch in advance. A standard human technique for managing this, philosophically, is what some Stoics taught. They taught a practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, in which you would deliberately imagine, in detail, the death of those you love, the loss of your possessions, your own demise. The aim was not to be morbid. The aim was to take away the shock. If you have already pictured the loss, then when the loss comes, you are not shattered. You are sad in a way that you have, at some level, agreed to. The Stoic technique, however, is designed for finite humans. For Marceline, the technique would have to be applied 1,000 times to 1,000 different people, with no end. The Stoic move can become unsustainable at her scale. It would, if you tried to maintain it for centuries, hollow you out. It would turn caring into a perpetual rehearsal of loss. Many immortals in literature have ended up there. They have become detached because the alternative is unbearable. The vampire who does not feel anything is in some sense the only kind of vampire who has solved the math. Marceline has refused that solution. Stakes is, among other things, the show acknowledging that her refusal is costly. She has paid for staying soft. She is, by the time of the miniseries, not in the casual sense, exhausted in the structural sense that Bernard Williams predicted. The Makropoulos woman exhausted. There is no longer a fresh project that excites her, and there has not been for a while, and the long view ahead is not full of fresh projects either. She wants to be cured of the condition that has made her perpetually open to grief. What the miniseries does, then, is fail her in exactly the right way. The cure works, the vampirism is removed. She is, briefly, mortal. And almost immediately, the older vampires escape and threaten her friends and her city. To save U, she has to take the vampirism back. She has to put it back inside herself. The miniseries ends with her once again being deathless and once again being the vampire queen, but now having chosen it. Now having actually held in her hand the option of mortality, weighed it, and given it up because she could not stand to let her friends pay the price for her choice. This is more than a plot move, it is the show's argument about her. She is not deathless because she did not get a choice. She is deathless because when she got the choice, she chose to remain who she was for the sake of the people she loved. There is a phrase the contemporary American philosopher Susan Wolf, who has written extensively about meaning in life, uses. She talks about meaning as fitting attractive subjective engagement to objective worth. A meaningful life, on her view, is one in which the things you find yourself caring about are things that actually deserve to be cared about. The fit is what makes a life rich. Not just being into something and not just being adjacent to something important, but being into something important and noticing that it is important. By the end of Stakes, Marceline has fit herself to her own life. She is the vampire queen because she has now picked it. She did not pick it the first time, when she became one out of post-apocalyptic necessity. She picked it the second time with the full knowledge of what it costs and what it offers. And she picked to be the kind of being who would carry the cost in order to keep being able to protect her friends. That is the deepest moral statement Adventure Time ever makes about her. Not that she is good despite being a vampire. Not that she has overcome her father, but that she has, in the only senses it is possible for her to have done so, chosen herself. Heidegger would have called this authentic existence. The German word he used was Eigentlichkeit, often translated as authenticity, but more literally meaning something like ownness. Heidegger thought that most of us, most of the time, live in an inauthentic mode. We do what one does. We follow the herd. We let our existence be defined by external pressures. To live authentically, in his framework, is to face up to the fact of one's own death and one's own freedom, and to make one's life genuinely one's own. Marceline, in Stakes, achieves Eigentlichkeit. She owns her existence. The vampirism is no longer something that happened to her. It is something she has now actively kept. Every day she lives forward from the end of the miniseries is a day she has, in some real sense, said yes to being herself, even though the alternative was right there on the table. This is, perhaps, the most important thing the show does for her. It is not the kiss, it is not the songs, it is not the resolution with Hudson. It is the moment in Stakes when the cure works and she gives it back. From that moment forward, she is not just the witness, not just the daughter, not just the songwriter. She is the person who chose all of those things, knowing the cost, with the alternative visible. She has gone, in Williams's terms, all the way through the Makropoulos problem. She has tested the case. She has come out the other side, not bored and not despairing, but committed. Recommitted, that is rare. It is rare in fiction. It is rare in real life. It is the thing the show is, more than any other single beat, asking you to admire about her. There is one more philosophical thread in Stakes worth pulling on, because it is one that the miniseries handles with surprising delicacy. The thread is the question of what mortal life actually offers that a mortal life cannot. This is a question with a long pedigree. The ancient Roman poet Lucretius, writing in the 1st century before the Common Era, devoted much of his philosophical poem on the nature of things, to the question of whether death was bad. His argument, drawn from his teacher Epicurus, was that death is not bad for the person who has died. The dead person no longer exists. They no longer suffer. They no longer have any preferences that can be frustrated. The death only seems bad because we, the living, project our preferences for continued life backward onto the moment of death. From the inside of death, there is no inside. There is nothing. Epicurus' famous summary of this position in his letter to Menoetius was that when we are, death is not, and when death is, we are not. Therefore, death is nothing to us. The Lucretian Epicurean position is one of the great consolations of the philosophical tradition. It has comforted millions of people in the last 2,000 years. It has been used by people facing terminal illness, by people grieving, by people merely contemplating their own mortality from a distance. Marceline is not afraid of death. The miniseries makes this clear in the 1st episode, when she explains to Bonnibel that she wants to cure not because she fears the alternative, but because she is tired of the current arrangement. The Lucretian consolation that the absence of consciousness is not a harm is not what is troubling her. She has, over the centuries, made her peace with the metaphysics of non-being. What is troubling her is something more subtle. What is troubling her, as the miniseries gradually clarifies, is that she has begun to lose access to certain experiences that she only had when she was mortal. She no longer feels hungry the way humans feel hungry. She no longer feels tired the way humans feel tired. She no longer feels the particular sweetness of small finite things, the small finite things that mortal humans build their entire emotional lives around. The vampirism has not made her unable to feel. It has thinned out the textures she can feel. There is a layer of human experience that after 1,000 years of vampirism, she can only access through memory. This is, philosophically, an important counter to the standard Lucretian point. Lucretius told us not to fear non-existence. He did not tell us how to think about the slow draining of phenomenological textures. The two are different problems. Marceline is not afraid of nothing. She is afraid of something specific, which is the slow becoming thinner of her own experience. The contemporary American philosopher Thomas Nagel, in his 1974 essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, made a related point about the irreducibility of subjective experience. Nagel argued that there is something it is like to be each conscious being, and that the something it is like is not capturable from the outside. To know what it is like to be a bat, you would have to be a bat. From the outside, you can describe the neurology, the behavior, the sensory inputs. Marceline, by extension, is the only one who has access to what it is like to be Marceline. She is the only one who knows what her vampirism feels like from the inside. She is the only one who knows what is missing. The cure she asks for in Stakes is, in part, an attempt to restore those textures, to eat real food again, to sleep without floating, to feel the cold the way a human feels the cold, to have, however briefly, the kind of body that mortals have and take for granted. The miniseries does not give her this in a satisfying way. The cure works mechanically. The vampirism leaves her body, but she does not get to enjoy the new mortal life. She has to spend the entire arc fighting the older vampires that her cure has released. By the time she could rest into being mortal, the situation has forced her hand. She has to take the vampirism back. She becomes... What this does, structurally, is leave her with the textures of the cure briefly experienced and then withdrawn. She got for a few episodes a taste of the thing she had been missing. The taste was real. The taste is now over. She is back to being the vampire queen, but with a clearer sense of what she has given up to do that. It did not let her have the cure permanently, which would have been false to her character and false to the show's philosophy. It also did not pretend she did not want it. It let her want it, briefly have it, and have to give it back. The result is a Marceline who is the vampire queen by choice, fully knowing what she has chosen against. There is a passage in the late writings of the contemporary American philosopher Susan Wolf, mentioned earlier, that comes back to mind at the end of Stakes. Wolf has argued, in essays about meaning and choice, that mature human life involves something she calls reasonable contentment. Reasonable contentment is the disposition of being at peace with the choices you have made, including the costs, while still being able to acknowledge that other paths existed and that those paths had their own goods. The mature person is not naively contented, pretending the alternatives were worthless. They are reasonably contented, which means they are aware of the alternatives and have made their peace anyway. Marceline, after Stakes, is reasonably contented in Wolf's sense. She has held the cure in her hand. She has given it back. She knows in a way she did not know before that mortality has things vampirism does not. She also knows more deeply than before why she keeps choosing not to take it. The choosing is no longer reflexive. It is informed. Her existence is more than ever before hers. The vampirism is no longer something her father gave her. It is no longer something the post-war world forced on her. It is something she has now picked up, knowing exactly what it costs in order to be able to keep doing what she does. There is also, by the way, a melancholy in the ending of Stakes that the show was wise enough to leave in. Marceline is back to being the vampire queen. Her friends are safe. The plot has been resolved. But she has spent 8 episodes of grief revisiting the moments that turned her into what she is, and that grief does not magically vanish at the end. The miniseries lets the residue of the grief stay visible. It is not a triumphant ending. It is a quiet ending in which she sits with Bonnie Bell, and Bonnie Bell hugs her, and the camera lingers, and the song fades, and the credits roll. That is what reasonable contentment looks like in practice. Not jubilation, not relief, a quiet sitting, a willingness to stay. We will move now into the closing reflection. Section 7. Everything stays. The lullaby is the spine of the show, in the way that, looking back, you only realize once everything else is played out. Adventure Time has hundreds of songs. The lullaby is the one the show keeps coming back to, in its quietest moments, when it wants to tell you what it has been about all along. Everything Stays was written, as noted earlier, by Rebecca Sugar, who had left Adventure Time several years before the Stakes miniseries to create her own show, Steven Universe. She returned briefly for one song. The song is performed by Marceline's mother, Elise, in the post-apocalyptic flashback in the second episode of Stakes, called Everything Stays after the song. The song is sung again, later, by Marceline herself. The song is performed differently each time. The first time, it is sung by Elise to a small Marceline as a lullaby. The second time, Marceline sings it to herself. The lyrics of the song, which we will not reproduce here, describe a small philosophical claim that the show then proceeds to test against an entire decade of episodes. The claim is roughly this: things change. They change all the time. They change without permission, and they change without comment. But the changing is not a deletion. The previous form is still inside the new form. The thing that the thing was is still part of what the thing is. Change leaves a residue. The residue is what you have to work with. In philosophy, this idea is at least as old as Heraclitus, the ancient Greek pre-Socratic thinker who lived roughly 2,500 years ago. Heraclitus is the source of the famous saying that you cannot step in the same river twice. The river you step into the second time is not the same river. The water has moved on, the bed has shifted, your foot has aged. Everything in the picture has changed. Heraclitus is often, in introductory philosophy classes, contrasted with Parmenides, who is roughly his contemporary, and who argued the opposite. Parmenides thought that real being was unchanging, that change was an illusion, that what genuinely is. The two thinkers between them set up one of the central oppositions in Western metaphysics. Is reality at its base flux, or is reality at its base permanence? The Everything Stays lullaby is, in its small Adventure Time way, an answer that splits the difference. It says, yes, things change. Heraclitus is right about the river, but the changing things stay too, in the new shape they have become. Parmenides is right about the persistence. The two halves are not in conflict. The river is moving. The river is still the river. This is also, you may notice, a version of what the late 20th century philosopher Derek Parfit argued about personal identity. Parfit thought there was no metaphysically clean self that persisted across decades. There were just patterns of psychological continuity, slowly remixing into new patterns, with the older patterns leaving a residue inside the newer ones. The river analogy is exact. You are the river. You are not the same river you were 10 years ago. You are also not entirely a different river. You are the river-shaped continuity that the residue has built. For Marceline, this is not a metaphysical curiosity. This is her life. She is, by the end of the show, 1,000 years of residue. She is a small girl in a tent, listening to her mother. She is a child being given a teddy bear by a man who is losing his mind. She is a teenager wandering the post-war waste with that man. She is a young woman becoming a vampire. She is the daughter refusing the inheritance from her father. She is the artist writing songs in her cabin. She is the on and off girlfriend of the princess. She is the woman who late one night asks to be cured of her own deathlessness. She is the woman who chooses to become deathless again. She is the woman in the kitchen with Bonnie Bell in distant lands, drinking coffee, laughing about something dumb in the morning light. All of those people are still inside her. The lullaby is the show's argument that they have to be, otherwise she would not be a person, she would just be a sequence of disconnected moments. The residue is what threads her into a self. This is what the show, in its slow, patient way, has been making the case for. That the question of how to live a meaningful life in the face of memory and time and grief and inheritance is a question that gets answered, if it gets answered at all, by what you keep inside you, not by what you achieve outside of you. The achievements are not the point. The kingdoms are not the point. The vampires defeated are not the point. The point is the residue. The point is what you have allowed yourself to become from what has happened. We have walked through, in the last several hours, 6 different angles on her. We have looked at her as the witness for Simon in I Remember You. We have looked at her as a survivor of the Mushroom War. In the post-apocalyptic flashbacks of Simon and Marcy, we have looked at her as the daughter who refuses the inheritance of her father across the recurring Hudson Abadir episodes. We have looked at her as the patient lover learning to see Bonnie Bell across centuries in What Was Missing and Obsidian and the series finale. We have looked at her as the artist whose practice of songwriting is constitutive of her existence. In the existentialist sense, we have looked at her as the immortal who in Stakes has tested mortality and given it back. What unites all of them? What unites the witness, the survivor, the refusing daughter, the patient lover, the artist, the chooser of her own form? What is the common thread? The thread is the conviction that what has happened to her is not deleted. It is held. The teddy bear is held, the note is held, the mother's song is held, the first kiss is held, the breakup is held, the making of the song is held. None of it is gone. All of it is in her. All of it is the structure of who she is. That is, finally, the philosophy of Marceline. It is not a single doctrine. It is a way of living. It is the disposition of being a vessel for what has happened. It is the willingness to be the place where the past keeps existing, even when the past is too heavy, even when there is no one else to share it with, even when the carrying takes 1,000 years. The reason the show keeps coming back to her, the reason she takes up so much of the show's emotional weight, the reason her songs are the longest, the reason her flashbacks are the most detailed, the reason the finale gives her the kiss, the reason the distant lands special centers her, none of that is because she is the most powerful character. Bonnibel is more powerful in many objective measures. None of it is because she is the most narratively central. Finn and Jake are more central in the strict sense. None of it is because she has the best jokes. Lumpy Space Princess has more memorable lines. It is because the show, somewhere in its writer's room, figured out that Marceline was a character who could carry the question of how a person stays a person. And the show kept giving her things to carry because watching her carry them is, somehow, what the show has been about all along. Now, return with me to the scene we started with. A girl who is not exactly a girl, sitting on a couch in the late afternoon light of a post-apocalyptic world, reading a 1,000-year-old apology note to its writer, while he laughs and plays drums and offers to add a guitar solo. The note has the only handwriting in the world that proves Simon Petrikov was once a man named Simon Petrikov. The handwriting is fading. The man is fading. The room is full of late sunlight that, in the show's color palette, is a slightly tired yellow-orange, almost amber, almost honey. Marceline is not looking at him. She is looking at the page. She is making a song out of the page. She is the only one in the room who knows what is happening. She does not stop. That is the show. That is also what the show is asking of you. Adventure Time in Marceline is making a quiet argument that what matters is what you can be the keeper of, that your job, if you have one, is to be the kind of person who, when given 1,000 years and a destroyed civilization, and a man who no longer remembers your name, and a father who eats souls, and a girlfriend you cannot work out a fight with, and a stuffed animal you have lost, and a song you cannot quite finish, keeps reading the page out loud anyway, keeps singing into the empty room, keeps holding the chain, keeps refusing the easier version, and the lullaby, the everything stays lullaby, is the show's gentle promise that this is not for nothing, that the residue is real, that the person you are tonight, in your bed, half asleep, with this voice still going, is the residue of all the people you have already been. None of them have left. They are stacked inside you. The way they are stacked inside her, the teddy bear is still in the room, the note is still readable. The mother is still singing, faintly, in the next room, to a child you used to be. If you found something worth carrying away from this, hitting subscribe means a great deal more than you would think. Sleep well. I will see you in the next one.